Welcome back. I'm talking to Andrew Johnson about comets, and we touched on the electric universe theory. Can you, because I still don't have my head around this electric universe theory, Andrew, can you give us in a nutshell, what is the electric universe theory?
In a nutshell, the electric universe theory says that electric force, electric fields, electric forces play a much greater role in the formation of structures we see in the universe when we look around,
right, than
is now acknowledged. And David Talbot and Wallace Thornhill, who looked at this, they based this on observation, in that they've seen, for example, plasma formations when you use electrical discharge in combination with gases. Mm-hmm. Right, so you pass electrical discharge in various ways with various fields through chamber full of gas,
yeah,
which is and then and you heat up the gas so it becomes plasma. And when you get the plasma is charged, so the charge within the plasma reacts to the electric field. It's influenced by the electric field, and they say that the plasma formations that you can create in the laboratory match, in many cases, large-scale structures in the cosmos,
right,
like there's the Helix galaxy, or the Helix formation, mm-hmm, and the Hourglass Nebula, for example. These all look like plasma formations where you've got electric fields in certain orientations, which are then causing the gases to flow and produce certain shapes of clouds. Mm-hmm. And they've got many examples of this.
So let me just interrupt that, Andrew. So are they saying that your standard astronomers and cosmologists, they've got it completely wrong? Is that what they're saying?
Yeah, well, I don't know if they say they've got it completely wrong, but they're saying that they make one of the basic points that they make, for example, is that if you look at the electromagnetic force, it's something like 10 to the 24 or 10 to the 34 times more powerful than, right, the gravitational force.
Right.
So how is it that such a weak force, according to standard theory, can give us most of the form and shape in the universe,
right,
when the stronger force, the electric force, is not giving us anything at all, according to the standard theory? That's one of their basic observations.
Okay, Andrew. Well, I don't think we're going to solve how the solar system was formed just in this conversation. It's a huge question. But let's go on to look now at some of the craters on Earth that still exist from comets which have impacted, because this is another area that's been used to create fear, perhaps,
exactly,
in films like Deep Impact and things like that. So what's the likelihood that a disaster could occur?
Well, I mean, yeah, let's talk about that, because that's again one of the reasons why I put this presentation together, because every time we get a comet comes into the news, as was with Hale-Bopp and Comet Elenin that we've mentioned, we'll probably talk a little bit more about that later. Comet Elenin was in 2011. You go onto the internet and you get many websites saying, oh, the comet's going to crash into the Earth, it's the end, yeah, stock up with water, buy your water filters, buy this, buy that, buy your radiation suit, etc. And so that's comets are really good for generating fear, as you already said. So, but it is true. But it is true in that if you go around the Earth, and I wasn't sure of this until recently, on the surface of the Earth have now been determined that there are 184 impact craters, and some of them are quite big. Some are several miles across. Right. The really, I think the most famous one, which the first one I ever heard about when I was a kid, is Meteor Crater in Arizona, and that's got a tourist centre next to it, and it's about a mile across. It's 500 feet deep. I think it's 50,000 years old. I think it's relatively recent, and it has to be, because the surface of the Earth, it's still there, because obviously the surface of the Earth gets weathered, it gets eroded, the climate changes, and so on.
So these are all relatively young impact craters because they're still there.
Well, most of them are relatively young. I mean, again, the ages vary, but I think you can see the ones that are more weathered are the ones which are older, obviously, and more eroded. So some of them are covered up, and the oldest one they found is in the Yucatan, which is the land has kind of moved over it and the land has reformed, and that was the one that was allegedly where the impact that wiped out the dinosaurs was, and that was, I think, 65 million years ago.
So it is possible that we could be hit by something which could affect life on Earth, then, you think?
Oh, absolutely, and in fact it's already happened. I mean, earlier this year in February 2013 we had the impact over Chelyabinsk, or rather not an impact, it was an airburst over Chelyabinsk. That was a reasonable sized object. Several thousand people were injured because of flying glass. You know, windows were blown in, and there was a factory wall fell down. So that was some quite significant damage, and it was across a relatively wide area. And the one which I put into this presentation when I was asked to give this was the Tunguska event, which happened in 1908, and they're still not quite sure what that was, but it was flattened an area of about 200 square miles of forest.
Well, some authors have suggested that was not natural.
Right, they've said, suggested various things: a nuclear bomb, Tesla's beam weapon, an exploding flying saucer or something.
Yeah. Well, and then we've got, you also mentioned in your presentation the alleged comet of 562 AD, which Alan Wilson is quite keen to talk about.
Right, and of course Alan would probably do a much better job of talking about that than I would. But the thing that intrigued me was the vitrified hill forts that I think you were going to go and film there, weren't you, at one time?
We were.
And I'm quite curious about that, because I came across a report from Italy of an impact in Italy, and that was dated also to about 500 AD or 560 AD.
Yeah.
So it appears there is a significant amount of evidence for some type of catastrophe, of reasonable sized catastrophe. And as I think Alan Wilson said, England was uninhabitable for about 7 or 11 years.
Yeah, so that's what Alan claims, and he claims that helped end one of the, you might call it the true British reign, of the original British, and the Saxons then came along and effectively just walked into an empty country, and it wasn't taken by force, as is suggested in the history books, for example. So, a hugely contentious issue. But that's Alan. Puts a lot of. He thinks that event was extremely important in changing the direction of British history in 562 AD.
Right, and of course I'd add on to that time, as I understand it, was called the Dark Ages, and indeed that's what it would have been.
Yeah. All right. Well, just to mention that. There is actually something, they call it the Space Guards Centre, and that's in Knighton in central Wales, or it's in mid Wales. It's on the border, England-Wales, and that was put up in the 90s, and I've been there. I've got some film footage of this, and its job, allegedly, is to look for near-Earth objects. They've got a couple of domes there with telescopes in them and what have you. But I know a researcher who thinks that it's actually a cover, and that it's not looking for near-Earth objects. I don't know this to be true. This is
it's looking for near-Earth objects, but not rocks.
It's looking for near-Earth objects, but they're actually on the Earth.
Right.
Yeah. Animal mutilation cases,
right.
Possibly. I mean, we don't know that, but it seems that there is a military connection with this Space Guard Centre, in that the person who managed to get permission and funding to build it is ex-military. So I went there, and there's a very interesting stone circle which was put there in 1997 called the Diana Circle, obviously after the death of Diana. It's a stone circle, 24 stones I think, and in the centre is a huge silver like chrome ball.
Wow.
Fixed to the ground with a chain. Now what that's for I don't know, but to me, are they really looking for near-Earth objects at that place, trying to save the planet? Possibly, but possibly not, in my opinion.
No, I mean, I think spaceborne systems would be far more effective in doing that these days.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of these objects seem to get discovered by relatively amateur astronomers.
Correct.
So can you tell us about that, Andrew? Because this applies with the ISON comet. We just want
to. That's correct. Yes, I mean it's very important to understand the role of amateurs, because you and I have spoken at length about how NASA has covered things up, and I think they're covering a lot of stuff up.
Mm-hmm. But just to interject there, Andrew, one thing that you can't cover up is the sky.
Yes. Yes, I mean that's right. You can't cover up people's own observations of the sky, but of course many people hardly even look at the sky. So if you go around telling them what's in the sky, and they never bother to look for themselves, then you can create a false impression of what's there or what isn't there.
Yeah. So ISON, is there any points you want to make about that before we come on to Planet X?
Right. Well, yeah. Well, Comet ISON, I mean, is a prime example because that was discovered by 2 amateur astronomers. The thing partly why I went through the explanation of the size and scale of things in the solar system is because of the way that comets are discovered by amateurs, and you've got some quite advanced equipment now. Comet ISON was discovered in September 2012 by 2 Russian astronomers. Now, admittedly they were working as part of an organised group, a well-equipped group of amateurs.
So that's about a year before it got anywhere near Earth.
Yes, correct. It was about a year before it was close to us. And they discovered it with a relatively small telescope. I think it was about roughly 1 metre telescope.
So interject again, Andrew. So can I take it from that then? If there is going to be a reasonably big object which is going to affect the Earth and hit the Earth, someone's going to find it first. With a lot of warning.
Yeah, that is precisely my point. Now, if you go onto that Minor Planet Centre, you'll see that they get thousands of observations logged on there per month. There are many amateurs around the planet in competition with each other looking for these comets, and we have to mention how the size of Comet ISON when it was discovered. When Comet ISON was discovered, it didn't have a really great tail behind it. It was a little tiny blob on a photograph. We've got an image of the discovery of how they discovered it. Right. They saw this little tiny dot on their image move, from one place to another on their image, a distance of, maybe 20 or 50 pixels on their digital image, and that was taken 30 minutes apart. So they knew it was moving at speed. And that object is 2 miles across, and it's out beyond the orbit of Jupiter when they discovered it.
And it was spotted by amateurs first.
And it was spotted by amateurs first.
So there you go.
And they're doing it all the time. They're doing it all the time. They have special telescopes which are computer programmed. They track portions of the sky. They put in go-to coordinates. They take an image. They take another image. They run that through image analysis software, and that'll subtract the one image from the other. And they're just left with a little dot. If that dot is there, it could be a comet, so they'll check it with somebody else. If they find the same dot and it's moved the next night, then they can work out the orbit.
Right. Well, I think that brings us nicely onto Planet X, or Nibiru, or any other name that you might want to call it. Just give us the background.
Yes, well, of course, Nibiru, this alleged, or one of the names, and actually discovered a new name recently. Hercolubus is another name for this. I hadn't come across that until recently, or Hercolobus or something.
A load of bollocks.
It sounds a bit like that, doesn't it? Yeah. Actually, yeah. So absolutely, so that the stories of Nibiru have come from various sources. The main one, to my understanding, being Zecharia Sitchin's books about called the Earth Chronicles series. He says that he's decoded the cylinder seals and the cuneiform tablets of the Sumerians, and they talk of a race of beings called the Anunnaki who came from Nibiru to the Earth, and they describe their home planet as a radiant planet and various other characteristics about it. And they then said that this planet came close to the Earth and caused certain problems in the solar system, and then it moved. It's in a 3,600 year elliptical orbit.
Similar to a comet's orbit.
Yeah, if you look at the books, it's similar to a comet's orbit, an oval-shaped orbit rather than a circle, basically, an elliptical orbit.
Allegedly several times larger than Earth.
Yeah, I forget the exact size that the Nibiru is alleged to be according to Sitchin, but it's I think maybe a couple of times bigger than the Earth. That sort of size, at least Earth-sized, if not bigger. I forget the exact figures.
Now, if an object that size did come through an elliptical orbit, it would cause havoc with the Earth. The oceans would be jumping out onto the land, and the ice caps would be being pulled off, and all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
All kinds of things would be happening that wouldn't be very nice. Absolutely. Yeah. And people, of course, we've seen, for example, various. We actually have seen an increase in the number of earthquakes. That is true. The earthquakes appear to have increased in frequency over the last 20 years, for some unknown reason. I don't know the reason for it, and I don't know if anybody else does. And we've had, similarly more extreme weather, which I think I know some of the reason for that. But of course, people wouldn't really want to talk about those reasons in the mainstream communities.
So just to get back to the alleged Planet X, the main sort of theory behind it comes from the Sumerian stone tablets.
I think it's where it originated.
But it's my understanding that if it does have a 3,600-year orbit, it's currently nowhere near Earth at the moment.
Right. I mean, Sitchin spoke about this, and I think he didn't exactly say where it was. He didn't claim to know where it was, because he wasn't sure when it was last near to the inner solar system. And it's very difficult to get information about that. So he didn't sort of say that it was going to be seen in the skies at any particular point. I must stress that. However, there are a number of other websites which I've mentioned in this presentation. For example, Zeta Talk is one, and then there's Marshall Masters' website, which is YOWUSA, and there's various other websites. There's another chap called John Moore. He's talked a lot about this alleged Planet X being inbound. It's on its way in.
But they're not basing any of this on any actual evidence, Andrew, are they?
Apparently not. I mean, I had somebody write to me claiming to have I said, well, if this Planet X is in the solar system or near the solar system anywhere, please can you send me a picture? And I got this picture of a green ball.
Right, and just to go back to the comet ISON discovery, if a Planet X is in our solar system and it's heading towards the Earth on a fairly elliptical orbit, we're going to see it maybe decades before it gets here.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely we are. And that's what I argued with this person who sent me this picture. And he claimed that this planet was, I think, 29,000 miles in diameter, and it was only 14 million miles away.
Right.
Which is closer than Mars. So I worked out that according to the figures that he gave me, that he said where it was, that it would be 40 times bigger in the sky than Mars is.
Right.
Now, you can't, obviously with your naked eye, you can't resolve Mars as a disk, but if it with you would be able to if it was 40 times bigger. I mean, if you put it into a telescope with 40 times magnification, you'd be starting to resolve Mars as a disk.
Now, just give me a comment on. I've had various people email me where they've taken a photograph of the sun during the day, and they're saying, right, well, you can see there's an object there next to it, which is a small disk, and that's Nibiru or Planet X.
Yes.
Just tell us about those.
Well, most people have sent me those same sorts of images too, and there are probably two main explanations for what those images show, or possibly three main explanations. One is a lens flare, so you get, for example, light being refracted inside the multiple elements of the lenses, and then because there's a little bit of a loss of light at each element of the lens, you can end up with this effect where the bright disk of the sun gets reflected and reflected and reflected, but then the angle, depending on the angle that the sun is coming into the lens, gets slightly off center, and so you'll see an actual disk of the sun slightly offset from where the real sun is on the image, and so you get this sort of lens flare or lens reflection. That's one effect, but it looks like it could be a real object.
Right. And if the sun was to move across the sky, would that visual artifact
that would move
as well?
Yeah, it would move.
So it would look like.
Would move, yeah, you would see that it would move, and you can see. In fact, somebody's even done a time lapse where you can see this effect.
Right.
The other effect that it can be is some of the cheaper webcams, they have like an overexposure feature where if the image gets overexposed, the disk of the sun will appear black.
Right.
And some people have said, oh look, you can see Planet X, and you get little black disks from the reflection in the webcam lens as well, because that's also overexposed. So you'll get that. So those are two of the effects. But the third one is a sundog, where people will see you have the sun in roughly in one position, then 22.5 degrees away from the sun, you'll get the light refracted in cloud. And I've got we'll put a picture in. I'll show you this picture I've got of a sundog, and you think it looks like another planet. It looks so weird.
And what about just touch on SOHO, which is the solar observatory, which is a probe or a craft between the Earth and the Sun, and it orbits at the same speed as the Earth, and it's monitoring the Sun. Now you can get those images online,
Right.
I've seen people claim to see Nibiru in those images.
Yes, that's right. I mean, the Nancy Lyda is one of these. She's claimed that you can see Planet X in these SOHO images. Now, of course, people can make claims of these images, and they can say, "Oh, look, you can see Planet X. That's that dot there." But if you're claiming that that's a Planet X in that image and it's of a certain size, then point your telescope at it. When of course that's not always possible because it might be in the field of view of the sun. But 6 months later, when we've moved around the sun and that's part of the sky is no longer in line with the sun, we can point the telescope at where that thing was, and if there really is a planet there, it might have moved a bit, but we should be able to see it, particularly if it's a big one. But no.
At some point it's going to be visible at night.
At some point it's going to be visible. At some point during the year, because we'll go right around the sun, so we can see all portions of the sky.
Right, okay, so we've debunked quite a bit today, Andrew. What about the 1983 IRIS probe, which was sent up and looked at the sky in infrared? And I heard that there was articles in mainstream press saying that in infrared it had seen a very large object in the outer reaches of the solar system. And I also read that scientists had measured perturbations in the movement of the outer planets, suggesting a 3 or 4 times Earth-sized objects in the outer reaches of the solar system. So,
absolutely, that's correct. And I was intrigued because I saw in the 1980s I saw a Horizon BBC documentary. I used to watch them fairly religiously when I was that age, in those years, and they did a documentary about the IRIS probe, which, as you said, it took pictures of the sky from orbit, and it took them in the infrared.
Orbit?
Yeah, from Earth orbit. So you could see things outside the Earth's atmosphere, and so you could look at objects which were very cool. Normally we don't get infrared radiation from space very much. In the lower atmosphere it gets all filtered out, gets absorbed in the air. So the IRIS probe could look at those cool objects. The sensor on IRIS itself had liquid nitrogen near it, so the sensor was very cool, so it could pick out these objects, and it did a great job. And then for one particular story, they discovered this sort of blob of infrared radiation on an image, and I'm not quite sure why they thought this originally, but they thought it was an object in the solar system, perhaps because it was fairly large. So they thought because it was larger it couldn't be too far away. But as it turned out, it was actually a gas, a knot of dust in Cirrus, and they didn't then report it. But the curious thing was with those stories
in another constellation.
In another constellation,
right.
Yeah. I think
so nowhere near our solar system.
Nowhere in our solar system, and that was later checked.
Are you sure about that? I mean, could that not be a cover-up, or? Well,
allegedly it could be a cover-up, but again, if it was really a planet in our solar system, we would have seen it by now, because 1983 was, we're talking 20 years ago now, 30 years ago.
30 years, yeah.
My maths is going on me. 30 years ago. So we've had much better equipment which has been scanning the sky ever since. The Hubble Space Telescope. We've had sophisticated radio astronomy techniques developed now. We've had these planetoids, as I say, much smaller objects detected out towards the orbit of Pluto, better amateur equipment. So we've had all kinds of developments, but they still haven't detected this planet. And also we've had the extrasolar planets have been detected. So it would be getting hard. It's now getting harder and harder to cover up the idea that there is a planet out there. Now there still could be. In other words, there could be a planet which is way out there, quite a long way distant, way out beyond Sedna, way out beyond these other objects, and only NASA knows about it. And they've got the equipment to detect it, and they could then control that information.
Right, but if it is there, it's probably quite a long way.
Yeah, I would say it's either very small or it's a long way off.
Are there any other notable people who speak about Planet X, and if so, what's their evidence?
Yeah, well, one of the people I came across a few years ago was this alleged professor, Jim McCanney. He runs a website, I think it's called jimmccanneyscience.com, and he's been putting a lot of stuff on there. He's published several books. Gets on Coast to Coast a lot. And I think he does know something about physics, and he knows something about maths, and he does have a fairly good speaking style. He appears to know some of what he's talking about. But he has also talked about uncontrollable irreversible global warming. He's into global warming and stuff like that, and he claims to be a weather expert as well. And he talks about Planet X, and he said, for example, I can read out a quote from him. far out in the solar system, actually it's not a quote, this is what he said on Coast to Coast though, this was a synopsis of what he said. He talks about Planet X type objects which could become enshrouded in clouds of dust and gas and thus be hard to see, said McCanney. But he noted that a large object could be quite visible by the time it reached Pluto. Once in this position, such an object could take hundreds of years to approach Earth, or it could come in at a super speed in a matter of weeks, he warned. So, pseudo-scientific, you know, he's not really speaking in sort of definite terms or measurements that he's made. It's just speculation. And there's no evidence that he was a professor. But he also talks about this the sun being a solar capacitor. So he talks about the sun being charged up as a capacitor, and then when a comet comes in, it discharges the solar capacitor, which sounds, you know, like the electric universe theory, but they certainly don't use that terminology. And with McCanney talking about Planet X, you know, and making these other claims, him sort of being described as a professor, but then not, and then he's talking about the electric universe, then is he, you know, sort of being put out there to discredit some of the statements of the electric universe proponents? And I think that probably yes, he is.
Right. Okay. Now, I know a lot of people are convinced by this Planet X, so I'd like to throw out a challenge. Anyone who thinks Planet X is there, send Andrew or myself the evidence, and we'll have a look at it. Can't say any more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is what I said to people. One chap, and he did send me some pictures, but they clearly weren't Planet X.
Right.
He said he used a green filter on a Fuji camera to photograph this thing.
Right.
I mean, there's no way you'd put a green filter over a digital camera to photograph a planet. You know, you're looking at it through a telescope, for heaven's sake.
Yeah, and just to push home the point that there are thousands of very, very capable amateur astronomers who are looking at the sky every night.
Yep.
So if they're not jumping up and down about it, it's probably not there.
Correct. That would be the thing that's, you know, totally swings it for me. That, in other words, NASA could cover it up, but thousands of amateurs, they would blow the whistle in a heartbeat. They want the fame that they've, you know, been trying to get for finding comets and things.
Right. Now, what about the theory that Nibiru is actually a satellite of a red dwarf? That it's a. Have you heard that one?
I haven't particularly heard that one. I've heard that it's a radiant planet. I mean, that's what Sitchin writes about. So that, in other words, it gives off its own heat.
Right.
But Jupiter gives off its own heat as well.
Right. There's something much bigger. It's in orbit, and the two of them come round.
Right. Yes, I've heard that as well.
Right.
And there's another name given to it. There's also Nibiru, and then there's Tiamat, which is, I think, also. It was meant to have been a planet in this solar system, and then there's another planet which Nibiru goes around. And
that explains the formation of the asteroid belt, does it not?
Potentially yes. I mean, potentially there was, but possibly you could.
Because this all links into plate tectonics as well, doesn't it?
Possibly.
I mean, that's maybe another interview that
it is another interview
we can do, and it's another area of science that Andrew does not quite think we've been told the truth about.
Correct.
Right.
The formation of the Earth, or the way that the Earth has developed. But so there are stories, for example, that Nibiru crashed into another planet in our solar system and things broke off, and that's what formed the asteroid belt. Mars was the moon of another planet, and again, if you look at the orbit of Uranus, that's very unusual. Sorry, not the orbit, but the motion of Uranus, because it's tilted on its axis. So the pole of the planet is facing the sun, or facing away from the sun, rather than sort of, you know, perpendicular to the orbit. Right.
Well, let's go on to Richard Hoagland now. We've mentioned the orbit of Uranus, because where do we start with Richard Hoagland? Because we'll extend this interview because it's not on TV, Andrew. Okay, let's just roll with it. A lot of people contend that many of the NASA photographs on the surface of the moon can't possibly have been taken on the moon, and we touched on that a little bit in a previous interview. And there are some very credible researchers who have proved that some of the photographs can't have been taken on the moon, that the Apollo missions are supposed to have taken, and most of them are agreed that it's some kind of set on Earth where they've had, you know, they've had everything set up. They've maybe taken some photographs. Whether or not they went or not, that's another argument. But some of the photographs are taken on Earth. Now, there are certain artifacts in the sky or in the backdrop which point to this. But Hoagland comes up with, I would say, a third position on this. Have you?
Right. Yeah, I've come across that. Correct.
Could you just explain that, Andrew?
Well, exactly. I mean, you know, we would say from the other research that the Apollo missions, as we were showing them on the CV, you know, were not real. That's not what happened. Something else happened with the Apollo missions, and we don't really know exactly what it is. So, if you come to that conclusion, as I have, then the films that we were shown must have been faked. And again, we talked a little bit about how perhaps Stanley Kubrick was involved, but basically we were looking at a movie set.
Yeah, and I'll just put on the screen, Andrew. If you don't believe that, folks, just go and watch this show. It's the hyperlinks on the site on the page now. But carry on. Okay,
and so so basically, if we were watching a movie set, then if you, for example, were taking pictures of that movie set, and then as Richard Hoagland does, is you take those pictures and you turn up the contrast, and you see all these grid structures in the back of the photograph, then what are you actually seeing? Are you seeing, as Hoagland claims, these huge structures that are 3 miles high, glass domes and, you know, structures and grids and so on? Or are you seeing, you know, the struts and the supports behind the black curtains that were holding up the black curtains?
Right. So, in other words, he's creating a second conspiracy to try and explain the same anomaly. Yes. And his conspiracy is that no, it was taken on the moon. It's just that those artifacts are in fact some huge glass wall on the moon.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
That's what he alleges.
He might be right. Yes. But we think there's maybe a reason why he's coming out with things like that.
Right. And I mean, it appears from what you and I have discussed before, Richard, and looking at what Richard Hoagland has put out, that he has put out some very interesting information, but then almost in the next breath sometimes it's just utter rubbish that he'll come out with, you know. And he's done this particularly as I've written about at quite some length with Dr. Judy Wood's research. He tried to present that at a conference and he made a number of serious errors, whereas some of it was okay, you know, but most of it was wrong. So we have to ask ourselves, is the guy, you know, is he clever? Is he dumb? Is he deliberately putting out false information to mislead people?
Right. Well, I sat through his 2011 Exopolitics talk about Comet Elenin and about how he thinks it's an artificial object, or was an artificial object, that had been launched at some point by some advanced civilization to come back to the Earth and give us all a message. And the evidence that he used to try and prove all of this, it was in numerology.
Yes.
So he was looking at times of the day that something happened and comparing that with angles that a triangle intersects a circle and this kind of stuff.
That's right. I mean, I think we gave the example, we should check this really, but he said, I think the comet was discovered at a time of 1951 in the evening. That was the alleged, either the time of discovery or the time of perihelion, the closest approach. And then he goes on to say in the next breath, well, 1951, that's 19.5, which is the hyperdimensional angle.
19.47, I think it might be.
Well, yes, it is. But
it's a hyperdimensional angle.
Hyperdimensional angle, that's what it was. And then he went on to say, and I was listening to this last night or the night before, and he said that the perihelion date was September the 11th, so therefore it had to be engineered that it was going to be perihelion on September the 11th.
Yeah, okay. I mean, yeah. Let's just... But
the problem is, I mean, people are, you know, I mean, I'm quite interested in numerology. We discussed this a bit earlier, but unless you've got some other evidence to back that up as well, you know, it's ridiculous just to do it on that basis. Unless you can show, for example, 3 or 4 amateur astronomers have photographed this comet, and they've both seen that it's got unusual characteristics compared to similar comets, but he didn't have any evidence like that.
Right. So Comet Elenin, do you know what eventually happened to it, Andrew? Did it land on planet Earth and occupants get out?
That's the thing. I think, as far as I'm aware, Comet Elenin just did what all the other comets do. I think it had a brief apparition for a few months, and then it faded away into obscurity.
Right.
As far as I'm aware, I certainly haven't seen any other evidence that anything came out of it, or you know, people have claimed that, for example, that Comet Ison changed orbit when it went past Mars. Well, not as I understand.
Ison or Elenin?
Well, Ison, you know, going back to Comet Ison, they claimed on the internet that its orbit had changed when it went past Mars because it had a close encounter with Mars.
Right. It's well, if it comes near to a large body, it will affect its path.
Yeah, yeah. If it was strong enough, but Mars is pretty small, so
okay.
it wouldn't have significantly affected it.
All right. So just to wrap up then, Andrew, you would say that if there's going to be a calamitous event, it's probably going to be spotted by a whole load of amateurs months, if not years, in advance. Is that?
I'd say, yeah. If you got something on the scale of anything bigger than, say, anything around the size of the moon, or even slightly smaller than the moon, you're going to see that quite a way off, and you're going to get a fair bit of warning, I think. You know, there are perhaps certain portions of the sky which are less well observed, but you know, there's enough amateurs spread around the Earth, I think, to get a fairly good tracking of most of the sky for any large objects that you know are coming in. However, you know, as was shown by Chelyabinsk early this year, assuming that in and of itself wasn't a staged event of some kind, which it could have been, you know, it wouldn't be that difficult for someone with, you know, space platform technology to lob something at the Earth and create this spectacle and say, there you go, you know, these asteroids are a real threat, you need to spend all this money on these early warning systems to warn people. I would not put it past some agency to have that in its plan. It would not be that difficult, even with current technology, to lob something at the Earth from, you know, not too far out in orbit and create that sort of spectacle.
Right. Maybe slingshot it around the moon or something.
Something like that. I don't know, but we, you know, as is evidenced by Tunguska, we can look at Tunguska. We don't have to read anything on the internet. We can look at the pictures from 1908. We can look at the pictures which have been taken in all the expeditions. We can see, and then we can look at Meteor Crater in Arizona. We can see that something pretty damn serious did happen there.
But I caught the end of a mainstream program talking about near-Earth objects, and they implied that you know, you might just get a sort of couple of hours warning for something which could create a lot of damage.
Yes.
Do you go along with that then? Or?
Well, I do. In terms of the mainstream, if you take the mainstream view of the technology that we have available to us, right? So the regular sort of structure of science is as we, you know, shown it in the mainstream media, the asteroid detection systems are of limited. They won't detect everything, and they won't detect everything early enough. So in other words, an object could come in that would cause some damage, and it could come in at short notice.
Right, but would so you're not saying that an amateur would probably spot that?
Not necessarily.
Right.
I think there's more chance now than there was that they would spot it, but it's still not. We could still be hit by something at any time. Right. With relatively little warning. And I say at the end of this presentation that I do that if a large object suddenly did appear in the solar system, or something the size of, you know, a couple of kilometres, 3, 4, 5, 6 kilometres across, and it was headed for the Earth, there wouldn't be, with standard technology, a lot we could do about it at the moment.
Right.
We couldn't deflect it with the standard technology that we have. It would if it was on a collision course, it would collide, you know, and that would cause a lot of damage. But again,
so you don't think they could deflect it with an energy weapon, Andrew?
I think they could, but of course they're not supposed to exist. So,
all right. So when you made that statement just now, you meant with disclosed technology.
Yes, disclosed technology, essentially. Right. Yes, okay. To use another phrase. So I think yes, they do. They would have any technology that they've got, you know, in Area 51 or other equivalent areas. They could probably do something to deflect that mass if it fitted in with their agenda to deflect it. Right. In other words, if they wanted to deflect it, they could. Right. So if they wanted a fairly small object to come in and wipe out a city, and it suited their agenda at that time, they knew roughly where it was going, they might just let it through, you know, just because it suited them. They would do that.
Right.
I mean, again, going back to 9/11, we know 9/11 wasn't a natural event. Somebody orchestrated that event. It didn't just happen by itself. Somebody set it up and they did the whole thing. Yeah. So what's to stop them seeing one of these objects coming in, thinking, oh yeah, we could use that, and then just let it through? Or if it's a really big one, it's going to wipe us all out. We can't be having that. We'll get rid of that one.
All right then, Andrew. Thanks very much again. Brilliant as usual. It just remains for me to say, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.